And with that, I'd like to welcome in Mark Dubowitz, the CEO for the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Mark is an expert in the Middle East. And in fact, in 2019, he was sanctioned by Iran, the regime accusing him of being the designing and executing arm of the U.S. administration on Iran policy. Mark, welcome to the show. It's an honor to have you here for our special.
Thanks so much, Lindsay.
Okay, so I want you to help us set the table and give us a better understanding of who Hamas really is, an overview of their goals and their mission.
Yeah, so Hamas really didn't just come out of nowhere 3 weeks ago. They actually were founded in 1988 by someone called Sheikh Yassin. And they were founded with an explicit goal of exterminating Jews around the world. It's actually in their founding charter, which is really just a vile anti-Semitic document. And it wasn't just about rhetoric. In the 1990s and the 2000s, I actually spent time living in Israel, and Hamas was responsible for pretty vicious terrorist attacks against Israelis. In fact, Hamas terrorists were strapping suicide belts to their bodies. They were filling those suicide belts with nails dipped in rat poison, and they were walking into schools, into discos, into cafes, on buses. And in that period of time, 1,000 Israelis were killed, thousands of Israelis maimed by Hamas and other terrorist organizations. So Hamas has been killing Israelis, killing Jews for 35 years.
Hamas likes to pose themselves as a national movement for Palestinians, but is it?
Look, in some respects it is. I mean, I think it's a very uncomfortable fact, and we like to try to distinguish Hamas from the Palestinians. In some cases, that's correct, and not all Palestinians are pro-Hamas, but a lot of Palestinians are pro-Hamas, and Palestinians in Gaza, in the West Bank, and around the world have provided significant support. I mean, it's worth remembering, as you know, that Hamas actually came to power in Gaza by winning an election. So they won Palestinian votes. They then took over. And then it was a brutal civil war where they turned their guns on more moderate Palestinian groups, threw Palestinians from rooftops, shot them in the kneecaps. So they certainly have been brutal and murderous against fellow Palestinians. Hamas has ruled that territory for over 15 years in a brutal way. They've only brought death and destruction and poverty and misery to that territory. They've taken, billions of dollars in humanitarian aid, and they've turned that into terrorist infrastructure, right? I mean, actually, cement that comes into Gaza, particularly from the Egyptian side of the border, Hamas has taken that cement and created not homes and schools and hospitals as you would expect any responsible governing authority to do so. They built a network of hundreds of kilometers of terrorist tunnels underneath Gaza for Hamas terrorists and weapons, and they're hiding their fighters and their weapons in those tunnels. Unfortunately, those tunnels are not available for Palestinians as bomb shelters.
Why don't they care for their own people? It seems like they would at least want to bring their own people along with them.
Look, I think at the end of the day, there are certain people, there are certain organizations that value life, and then there are death cults that value death. I mean, unfortunately, it's not just Islamists who've demonstrated that. We have the 20th century with the Nazis, with Soviet communism, with Chinese communism, right, where we've had movements, ideologies, dictatorial regimes that were death cults, and they didn't value the life of their people. They didn't look to improve the welfare of their people. They were committed to using their people in order to advance a genocidal ideology. And sort of the 20th century and now the 21st century should be a screaming example of what happens when we as civilization, as Western civilization, face these death cults who are committed to death, not to life.
Let's talk about Iran specifically, because a lot of attention is on them right now because they are one of the largest funders of Hamas. And it was interesting because after the horrific terrorist attacks on Israel on October 7th, Iran's supreme leader, he came out and said that we kissed the hands of those who planned this attack, and just goes to showing what you've been saying, Mark. Are they just hoping that Hamas plays out their goals to wipe Israel off the map?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the Iran Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei is a vicious dictator, but he's also incredibly strategic. And he has had a long-standing plan to surround Israel with a ring of fire on every border. So he has supported terrorist organizations and allowed Hezbollah, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Iraqi Shiite militias in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen. What he's done is he's shipped fighters and weapons and trained them, directed them, and supported them in order to create this ring of fire. So Israel is surrounded on every border. And then what he does is he lights up borders. And so for the Supreme Leader, he looks at this as a chessboard, a rather deadly and macabre chessboard. And he's playing these various pieces. And for him, Hamas is just one piece. And again, if he can fight Israel to the last dead Palestinian in Gaza, that's perfectly in line with his strategy.
It's such a complicated scenario that we see unfolding before us. Mark Dubowitz, we appreciate your expertise in helping us understand these deep-rooted hatreds from these regimes and these terrorist organizations. Thank you for being with us tonight.